You are listening to The Breakfast Show here on Faith FM. Maria Andreoli's on the phone. She's our resident psychologist.
And she's my good friend too.
Oh, awesome.
She's my bestie.
Okay, shout out. But hey, Maria, we are so glad to have you on to talk about this topic of autism in children. How are you going this morning?
Yeah, I'm having a pretty good morning. Pretty excited to hear Lindsay's on here as well.
Cool. All right. Friends, besties, hanging out. Oh, man, I'll just let you guys take this away. I'll just go and chill out. But hey, no, we are excited to talk about this topic because it's been doing the rounds in the news. I think it's come really into the cultural forefront in, I would say, the last 10 years. Not that it hasn't been existing before then, but I mean, more recently, people talked about Tylenol and autism, or vaccines and autism. And before then, just trying to work out, hey, what is this? What is the spectrum of autism? So I think where we really need to start in this journey is, because so many people are saying so many things. What is autism? Yeah,
you're right. There's been so much on the media lately, and some really interesting, like debates and arguments going on about it all. But essentially, autism is a difference in development. So I know there's lots out there on, the different causes, and there's no clear answer. But essentially, it's a developmental difference in the way someone understands and relates to others, in the way they use and process language, and just the way they kind of see the world, the way their brain kind of works in general, which I know sounds super broad, but it is broad. And that's why we've called it the autism spectrum now, to recognize that it can look so unique for different people.
Okay, so this spectrum idea, is this common in other, areas of development and mental health and these kinds of things? Because whenever we say autism, the next step of the spectrum gets brought up. Can you give us some insight into that? Because I feel like it's quite unique to autism, and it's something that's different and really needs to be understood there, because it infers that there's different kinds and different types, and they're not the same.
Okay, so maybe I think what'll help us understand it if I talk about the different ways that it can look quite practically.
Sure.
Right? I think that might help. So let's just going with what it looks like in children. So one of the things that I said there's a difference in is how that person kind of processes language. Mm-hmm. So for one kid, that difference in language might mean that they have a major language delay, 6 years old and still not really forming many words.
Sure.
For another child, that language difference might mean that they speak in what we call echolalic communication. So they're repeating things repetitively, or parroting, for example. And for another kid, it might mean that they just speak in a really formal way, use massive, big words for their age, are just super formal in their language. Mm-hmm. So you can put all these kids together in a room, they will all look so different. But it's still a language difference that is part of the autism spectrum. So it's similar, there's does that kind of help a little bit? That's
absolutely.
Just one example. But
I think it's fascinating. It's really awesome. The insight that you've just given us, because it means that this particular, again, if autism is defined as differences in development, then it makes sense that the spectrum is there, and you've given us a lot of insight into what that can particularly look like. Now, I want to jump into then, it could make that detection hard, because we could notice differences in development, but simultaneously those differences are so different, and there's a spectrum within those. So I guess my next question is, what can we do? What can we see as parents or as teachers? What can we see as the early signs to notice that, hey, maybe this person or this child has autism?
Yeah, so you're right. It is broad, so it can be hard to pick up. But I guess it's when you see multiple of these differences that maybe the alarm bells, start to kind of go off. So, if you just have a kid who has, say, some kind of delayed language or any of the unique language things that I just spoke about, wouldn't really raise too many flags. But if you also see that paired with another part of autism is a difference in like a need for routine or repetitive behaviors. So some really common ones in kids are things like flapping hands, spinning, lining toys up, walking on tiptoes, any kind of repetitive movement. If you also see that like paired with just being more sensitive, you know, the way they kind of perceive their senses, that develops differently. So, you know, being really sensitive to noise, lights, struggling with certain food textures, being a picky eater. Look, I would just say anything that's kind of standing out as this child seems to be developing differently.
Sure.
And, you know, it's just something is, you know, different, or they're really struggling with just like day-to-day life and routines. That would probably be the big thing that would, you know, maybe lead me to say might be good to go down the route of assessment.
Yeah, sure. So I guess that leads to my next question. It seems that, yeah, there's so many different ways in which this can be expressed. Is there a real challenge then in diagnosis and assessment, and particularly making a plan to help people that are in this particular position, you know, giving them a plan of how they can make steps forward and find some kind of solution to overcome the challenges that they're facing?
So with diagnoses, I'm a really big advocate for early diagnoses.
Okay.
I know a lot of people might shy away from it, but I actually think it can make a huge difference because there are some really practical big things that we can do. So one of the things that's really important for parents to know is that if that child, I didn't mention earlier, but with autism, there's not different types, but there's different levels.
Sure.
We either give like a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3. All the level means is how much support is this kid going to need throughout their life. Yeah. So the idea with level 1 is like they don't need much support. Level 2 is they need a bit of support. So if they get that diagnosis of a level 2 or higher, they're probably going to get access to NDIS, which means like funding for, you know, early intervention supports. And there's actually so much we can do. Now, look, one thing that I will say is autism isn't something that needs to be fixed. It's not something that will be fixed. It's developmental. It's lifelong, but it does need to be understood and it does need to be supported. Yeah. So I think, down the route of supports, like actually teaching the kid social skills. You know, one of the developmental differences is they don't learn those as easily. So really teaching that kid, really teaching them how to manage, you know, there's that sensory information that's overwhelming, supporting them with that, you know, teaching them like speech therapy, language. A lot of these kids really struggle with just communication. So there is so much that can be done, and that early intervention is really important.
Yeah.
I also know that with NDIS, sometimes you can get access for families to have support, like not just the child, but for the families to have an opportunity to have respite when dealing with a child with such high needs can be overwhelming. So it's also good for the family to go through that assessment process for the child.
And I just want to talk to that as well. I'm happy you mentioned that because it can be so hard for families who have a kid on the spectrum, but usually if they have one, sometimes the siblings end up having it as well. And so I have so many families who are just, you know, really struggling, and NDIS can really come in and provide support workers, you know, who come and help with the kids, give the parents a bit of respite. And they're able to do a lot of things that are similar to that as well.
Yeah, I remember in my family, we would have a respite worker come and help with my younger brother who has autism, and I would have support as his sibling going to a support group for children whose siblings had autism. So there's all sorts of supports available out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I'd love to ask, because you've kind of highlighted some of the ways in which we can help that development that has taken a bit of an alternative path because of the certain developmental challenges that kids with autism have. What would you say that looks like if you could, because you said, there's so much we can do. I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. Like, what do those challenges look like, and what are the main ones that we can look to address as parents or friends or whatever it may be?
Look, there are so many challenges that can come with autism. I mean, I've had so many beautiful clients who are on the spectrum, but I've also just watched them suffer so much, and that's been really hard. And I think a big one, I mean, there's so many I can talk about, but a big one is really just feeling misunderstood, and not really quite struggling to find, where they fit. I've seen a lot of kids who they are on the spectrum. They're really trying to find just kind of, some kind of social acceptance, but it's really hard. I've seen kids who they are struggling just with school, just being able to sit through a class. And so they, because it's overwhelming, it's noisy, it's loud. High school, there's so many different teachers, classroom changes. This is so much for a kid on the spectrum. But then they start, kind of like missing class, not showing up. People just assume they're misbehaving, but they're not. They're just struggling to cope. So I think that one of the big challenges is that misunderstanding, that is just so pervasive in the life of a person on the spectrum. And I suppose the antidote to that then is understanding, as parents, as teachers, as friends, or as classmates of people on the spectrum, just really trying to understand that person and where they're coming from.
Now, in that understanding, and this is kind of the other side that I want to look at, is there a place where we can understand and see maybe the strengths of autism? Because that's something that we're also, we see as well, this idea of, autism causing this like savant type development where there's a real focus in particular areas, this hyper focus that leads to a really high level of talent. Like what does that look like? What can we say are the strengths then of autism?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think really important. I think one of the things that I hate about diagnoses is when it, traps a person in a box where they feel incapable. So a big thing that I advocate for is looking at the strengths. And, with autism specifically, look, one thing I'll say is not every kid with autism is going to be like a super genius, like in a lot of media portrayals. Like that can happen, absolutely, but it doesn't always happen. So it's important to say that's a stereotype. But having said that, there's still a lot of unique abilities that these people may develop. You've mentioned one, which is like, it's a little bit different to the hyper focus that we see with ADHD, but with autism, we still do get very specific interests. Not necessarily like that hyper focus, but like very specific interests that this person just might delve into, even for years at a time, just be really passionate about. And you can only imagine the kind of learning that would come through that. There's a lot of very, very logical and detail-oriented thinking. Now, this is really interesting. I've talked about how kids on the spectrum struggle with social skills, sometimes being able to read facial expressions and changes in body language. And they've actually done research, and they've found for a lot of these people that part of the brain that usually is used for classifying different faces and face expressions is, kind of like rewired to classify different objects, which that's kind of why a lot of kids on the spectrum, like they're really like amazed with like different dinosaurs and like learning all the different types of dinosaurs and classifying them, or different types of cars or trains. And as you like grow older, you can see how that becomes such an awesome, like logical and detail orientated type of thinking that can, they can really excel in so many different areas.
Yeah, amazing.
We see really, it's cool, isn't it?
100%. Like, I really concur. I have some friends who, came from backgrounds of, early diagnosis, getting treated and whatnot, and now they've grown into specialists in their field because of kind of this talent they have, because of the way that their brain works, which is really amazing. I'd love to ask you, we just have about a minute left. Maria, do you want to leave anything with us?
Look, I think the biggest thing that I would leave, something that I see a lot, is a lot of people are scared of, having a label of autism, which I completely understand. But, you know, just with what I've seen over the years that I've worked with these different families, my own conclusions, you know, for what I would do if I had a child who had autism is I don't think I would hide it from them. I'd probably explain it to them early in their language and really just empower them to understand the way that they think, understand what it is that they need, and really teach them how to advocate for themselves, you know, because the world's going to be tough for that kid. But if you can give them the skills to speak up and to really understand and explain what's going on for them to other people, especially if they're like a level 2 or higher, I think that's probably the most important thing that you can leave that kid with.